Stan, we're live.
Thank you, Larry, the Liberty Guy. Welcome to another edition of In the Dugout. I am your host, Mike Stenhouse. We'll go with the traditional HCAP today while we're in the dugout. Okay, wow. We had a terrific show with two great guests yesterday, and we've got two more great guests for you today. Coming up in just a few minutes, this man, you've seen him all over the cable news stations in recent years, many years. He's from the Heritage Foundation. He's an elections expert, and he's going to talk about this travesty of a bill, H.R. 1 in the United States House of Representatives, that actually passed yesterday. It actually passed. It's under the guise of election reform. But let me tell you what, wait till you hear the craziness that's in this bill. Let me tell you that, we don't like to be partisan on the show, but the Democrat Party has gone completely off the rails. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. We talk, well, you've heard us talk about it. Never, Neverland, right? They live in Never, Neverland now. So we're going to talk to Hans von Spakovsky. That's quite a mouthful, but I spit it out well. Hans von Spakovsky, say that 5 times fast. Great guy. You're going to really enjoy him. He's going to talk about the Heritage Foundation's report on this crazy bill that now will be headed to the Senate. And we'll talk about its fate there when he comes up. And of course, later in the show, we will have Dr. Andrew Bostom to talk all things COVID. When he comes on, we've got a few items we want to go over with him today. Vaccines, the announcement by McKee today that he's favoring teachers unions or prioritizing teachers to get vaccines. To me, that's just a big giveaway to the unions who don't like him in the first place. So politics already being played. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Okay, and then and we're going to talk about the new Johnson & Johnson vaccine. We'll look at Rhode Island data. And we'll look at a really intriguing video from the official government data expert in Sweden about that basically would support the concept that deaths related to COVID are being significantly overstated. And this guy from Sweden pretty much proves that statistically. So Dr. Boston found that for us. We'll take a look at that. Okay, first, a few quick rounds of batting practice. We're going to call that batting practice now, where I do some quick hits before we get to our main topic or our main guest. So most of you have seen the story by now where even certain Dr. Seuss books are being canceled. So here's a little parody on that. Forget cancel culture. I think it's a sham. I do not like it, Uncle Sam, I am. Ignoring achievements in the name of the woke and cause more division. That's true. With the fires they stoke. Take history out of context as now the new game, not looking for justice, just someone to blame. Today it's a book, so watch what you do. One day in the future, they may cancel you. And boy, don't we know that to be true. In fact, we're going to talk about, when Dr. Boston comes on, since he was here last week, you probably don't even know that his appearance on our show got canceled. We'll talk about that when Dr. Boston comes on. Now, Dr. Seuss, you've probably seen the video if you've watched cable news, how the Obamas read it during, was it yesterday or 2 days ago was National Reading Day, or this is Reading Week. And in those weeks and years past, presidents, including Barack Obama, have read Dr. Seuss to children. There's nothing racial in there. Some people may not like the way he portrays certain minority characters when he brings them up. They claim that they represent some stereotype, but no one's told me what that is yet. But there's nothing overt in there. You got to really stretch to make that case. But let me tell you this about Dr. Seuss. Not only did the Obamas read to children during National Reading Week with it, but I can tell you from people I've talked to, multiple people, then in at least one university, and I think I can say 2 universities in this state, in 2016, and since then, don't forget, the end of the fall semester in 2016 was so dramatic for these snowflake college kids. Not only were they coming up on their end of semester exams, but they had to deal with the election of Donald Trump. So a lot of these schools took the way to take care of these snowflakes was to set up little reading rooms, pillows, bean bags on the floor. Some faculty member or staff member reading to them Dr. Seuss books. They were so traumatized by the elections, by the upcoming midterms, that somebody actually had to read Dr. Seuss to them. That's how well accepted Dr. Seuss was considered just a few years ago, until the cancel culture set in. It's just silly, folks. I mean, it's serious, but it's silly, and this is the left's never land to make believe. All right, you may have seen that Dr. Seuss was not the only comic canceled. Here's a headline: I never knew it was a conservative comic strip, but Mallard Fillmore, that's been canceled. All the syndication of it has been canceled nationally. I don't know. I don't read the funnies anymore. I'm familiar of the title Mallard Fillmore. If any of you know about it, go ahead and write it in YouTube. All right, last item before we get to our guest is, again, I had to show you this from the newspapers today. So we have a brand new governor, just appointed his brand new staff. Public servants, right? They want you to say, these are the public servants. Look at some of these salaries for some of these titles. Who's serving who? Really, who's serving who? A senior deputy chief of staff, $162,000 a year. Not even our guest, Hans von Spaskowski, makes that much. Let's bring him on right now. Hans, welcome back to In the Dugout. We enjoyed seeing you last year when we talked about your Electoral College book. welcome back. Unmute yourself.
I got it. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, that was quite a lot of money that the taxpayers are paying for all those staffers.
Well, I'm sure it's the same in pretty much every state, although I don't know, you would probably know better than me. You have a national view, but a special assistant, that's an assistant, administrative assistant, making, over $70,000. One of these people here, Hans, I don't know if you want to make a political comment, but one of them is Corey Jones, a policy advisor at almost $60,000, who's one of the heads of Black Lives Matter in Rhode Island. So if you're a new governor appointing that person to your policy team, what we once thought might have been a moderate governor, I'm not sure, sir, we could think that anymore. What would you say to that?
Well, I certainly would want to ask him what involvement he had, if any, in the organized and funded violence, looting, and arson that BLM and Antifa both were involved in American cities across the country last year.
Well, yeah, that is a good question, and we might have to look into that a little bit later. Okay, well, I see you're playing ball with us. What cap do you have on today?
It's the Heritage Foundation.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. That's awesome. We've had Little League caps on. We've had other nonprofit charity caps on. I wear some of my school or former sports caps that I wore when I was a younger, thinner man. So now, are you von Spakovsky? Is that Polish? What is that?
Russian? My mother was German. My father was Russian. So I'm actually first generation. My parents immigrated here in 1951.
Oh, okay. Terrific. All right. Terrific. All right. So let's get into it. So Heritage Foundation, I'm going to try to bring it up here, put out a report on this just insane bill that the House actually passed yesterday, right? HR 1, right?
That's right.
And I'll just let you talk. I'm showing the website, but you've got, why don't you first summarize these three key takeaways from what this bill would do?
Sure. Well, it would federalize the election process. Most people probably realize that the states have been running our elections, including federal elections, since the start of the country.
And is that constitutional? Is that because the Constitution says it's that way?
Yeah, the Constitution has a provision that says that unless Congress steps in to set the time, place, and manner of congressional elections, they leave it up to the states. And it's also up to the states to determine the rules for the election of presidential electors too. So there are some things that Congress can do, but they cannot engage in a complete takeover of the election process, particularly not when it comes, for example, to the qualifications of voters, which is entirely up to the states. Congress has absolutely nothing to do with that. This bill, in essence, will micromanage the election process now, and it has all of these really bad policy mandates that it will impose on the state, such as saying, if you have a voter ID law in a particular state, you can no longer enforce it.
All right, we're going to get into all those details in a second. All right, so that was your first. So clearly, in your view, some of these provisions in this bill are unconstitutional.
Yes, some of them are unconstitutional. Others, while they might be constitutional, they're just bad policy. They remind me. Remember, Justice Scalia once said, "Well, there are some things that Congress does that are just really stupid, but they're still constitutional."
Yeah, I gotcha. All right, your second takeaway here. I don't know if you've covered it yet, but just quickly.
Yeah, like I said, it would.
Okay, yeah, we covered that.
It would rewrite the decentralization so that the federal government is running things.
All right, and the third one, I would just say that many people felt there were so many irregularities, unconstitutional things, fraudulent things happening last election. Who knows to what extent if it would have overturned? That's not the point.
Right.
But all those bad things that happened, they are now trying to make them legal in this bill. All of those things, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Take the worst aspects of last year's election and now cement them in federal law, and then make things even worse. This bill is basically everything that progressive left-wing groups have wanted for years. And not only does it get rid of every kind of safety protocol that states have in place for the administration of elections, it's also got a whole nother section that would restrict political speech and political activity in a way that I think really violates the First Amendment rights of Americans.
We have a saying we heard somewhere. You're familiar with State Policy Network, I'm sure.
Right.
We're the Rhode Island member of that, and they had a election integrity webinar, and somebody on it came up with a phrase, and we've been using it ever since. I assume you would agree that ideally you want to make it easy to vote but hard to cheat. That's a pretty simple way of saying what we'd like, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. You have to have both access and security. The folks pushing this bill, all they care about is access.
To vote and easy to cheat, right?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what they're pushing with this. And look, let me give you a quick example of this. Okay. At the same time that they're saying you cannot require an ID from anybody before you allow them to vote, it requires states to put in same-day voter registration, which means that the states have to allow you to walk into a polling place, register, and immediately vote. Combine those two things, and what do you get? It means that you could walk into a polling place, say your name is Tom Smith, register, immediately vote, and then go to the next polling place down the street, say that your name is Tom Jones, register, and immediately vote. And states can do absolutely nothing to detect that or to stop it.
Is it even a provisional ballot? It's just a straight ballot.
Straight ballot.
It's just insane.
Right.
I mean, this is really insanity stuff, isn't it?
It is. And by the way, remember the delays we had and the disputes over absentee ballots? Well, this bill mandates that every state has to accept absentee ballots for as long as 10 days after Election Day.
Oh my God. It also mandates early voting.
That's right. Every state has to have at least 15 days of early voting. And again, it's taken the choice away from the voters and residents of each state. Look, if a state thinks early voting is a good idea, I don't think it is, but if they do, then yeah, they could put it in with their state legislatures. But there are states that don't think it's a good idea and haven't put it in, like New York. And yet this bill says you have to do that.
Now, I didn't see this next one I want to ask you about isn't in the bullet points from your report. But I want to ask you about, because I don't know if it's in this bill or in something else, but I also heard that there's a provision to where the government can collect money from individuals or corporations. They'll match it 6-1 and they'll give it to the incumbents to help them with their campaigns. Is that in this bill? Or
Yeah, it is. And you know, the bill is okay. The bill is so big that we couldn't summarize all the bad parts. So we got the essential parts. But in essence, this law would set up a public funding program for people running for Congress. So in other words, your taxpayer funds would be used to help subsidize the political campaigns of people who want to get elected to the U.S.
Right,
House
not just for incumbents, even their challengers.
Yes, but the point is, look,
yeah,
that you would be forced to see your taxpayer money being used to support a candidate who you may vigorously disagree with on issues and don't like and would never vote for.
And is that tax? All right, but what triggers it is some voluntary donations, and then the government matches it 6-1. Is that what I saw?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
So my tax money, I might not like either candidate, right? But yet my money's going to go to support one or both of them. I mean, what's the purpose of that? I mean, we know incumbents like to do rules that will help them get reelected. So I assume there's some thinking there that even though everyone would share in this is going to help incumbents somehow.
Right, because it's going to make it easier. It's going to make it easier for them to get the money they need to get reelected. And they have such a huge advantage already over challengers, as you know, because of their name recognition and the fact that they can use the franking privilege to send out newsletters and other things to all their constituents, which keeps their name recognition up high, which helps them get reelected.
All right, now they're also talking about allowing, when it comes to registering voters, a couple of things I want to talk about. Online registration. What kind of security can we have with online voter registration?
Well, look, here are the devil's in the details. Some states have put in online voter registration, but only if the state already has a record on you. So in other words, you have a driver's license with the state.
Okay.
They've already checked your ID. They've already checked your residence. They've got your signature. They've got your photograph. In those states, you can go online and say, I want to register to vote because they've already got a state record. This would force states to allow unlimited online voter registration. So anybody, even somebody the state has never heard of, could go and register to vote. You understand, I mean, normal people understand how this would open up the registration process to cyber criminals and hackers and all kinds of people who could.
Oh, they don't exist, Hans.
Oh, yeah, right.
They don't exist. That's a myth. Now, were you just calling the members of Congress who voted for this crazy people?
Well, I think they're making a big mistake. Yeah, that's right. By the way, on the whole issue of, folks on the left say, look, there's no election fraud. We don't need to worry about it. Just within the last couple of days, you may have seen this. There have been 4 people arrested in Texas, including a justice of the peace, and
including
charged with
a judge,
150 counts of election fraud. In Mississippi, a judge just overturned a city council election because of absentee ballot fraud and other fraud like that. And you may have seen this. This is actually a proof that facts are sometimes stranger than fiction. I don't know if you saw this, but a guy just was convicted in New Hampshire of voting twice, once under his real name and a second time under a artificial persona he created, a woman who he got registered to vote, and he actually put on a wig and went and voted it.
No.
Yeah, oh, yes.
he did the whole thing all the way down the line. Now, Now, no, but that's all fake news. That, that's not real. Come on, we all know none of this is real. All right, now they also want to. Why do they want to register 16 and 17-year-olds?
Well, that is a mandatory requirement. States will have to allow that, and you understand the problems that will cause, because remember, anybody who's worked in a polling place knows that the voter registration list you get has the name of the person and their address. It doesn't have their age. And since you will not be able to ask somebody for an ID when they come in, it's going to make it very difficult for jurisdictions to prevent those 16 and 17-year-olds from actually voting before they turn 18.
So they claim they want to register them, but just to get them into the system, and
right.
But they're not going to be legally able to vote until 18. But because of the checks and balances in this bill that are eliminated, if a 16 or 17-year-old shows up, nobody's going to know.
Right. That's the whole problem with that.
That's insane. This is insane. All right. Now they also want to automatically dump in any name that's in any government database for welfare, prisons. Those could even be non-citizens, right? Anybody's in there is automatically going to go in the voter rolls. It means they're automatically registered to vote.
Yes, that's right. And in fact, to prevent these aliens who get automatically registered from getting in trouble, there's a provision in there that says they can't be civilly or criminally prosecuted if they're automatically registered. And it's not just state databases, it's also federal databases. Think about that for a minute. That means that federal departments, whether it's the Department of Justice or the Federal Bureau of Prisons, others, they're all listed as having to provide the names of people for registration by the states. That means those federal agencies will be determining what your domicile is, what state you're domiciled in, which could, of course, affect you for tax purposes and tax reasons. Plus, it's going to lead to multiple registrations of the same individual, because I may have a record.
In multiple databases, right?
And you're in multiple databases, exactly.
Probably in multiple states.
Yes, exactly right. So the current problem that we have with voter registration lists for states being in such bad shape, with multiple registrations and people who are registered in more than one state, that's just going to get much worse.
And doesn't this bill make it even harder to remove people from the voter rolls, even if they're identified as?
Yes, it severely restricts the ability of states to compare their lists with other states. It even restricts the ability of states to use the Postal Service's NCOA system. That's the National Change of Address System. Yep. Remember, when you move, you can file with the Postal Service through your new address, and they'll forward your mail to your new address. That was sanctioned as an official system that states could use in the motor voter law all those years ago. Now, this law basically takes that away and restricts the ability to use it.
And as you mentioned earlier, so our state, first of all, we have a motor voter law where as soon as you're registered to drive or get a driver's license, you're registered if you're over 18 automatically. You don't have to do anything. I don't know if we do anything off the Medicare SNAP rolls. We were one of those states where through a court consent decree that had our mail ballot eligibility, the witness signatures or notaries removed from mail ballots because supposedly of the COVID. This bill would remove any requirements like that in any state on any mail ballot across the nation, right?
No, that's exactly right. And by the way, that using COVID as an excuse to say you shouldn't require a witness signature was ridiculous. The similar lawsuit was filed in South Carolina, and they actually brought in the director of the infectious diseases division of the medical school in Charleston, who said, in essence, a witness can stand 6 feet away with a mask. It takes almost no time to witness a signature. So obviously, it wasn't it wasn't a problem. In fact, think how much more time people spend going to their grocery stores and their pharmacies than taking a minute to witness somebody's signature.
Well, let me tell you how you might want to retell this story. If you don't mind, I'll do it quickly, how that happened in our state. So they tried to do it legislatively. It passed our House, but the Senate did not pass it
Right.
for selfish reasons. There were a lot of progressive left challengers with a lot of the kind of establishment Democrats, and they didn't want to make it easy for them to be unseated. So the Senate didn't pass it. So then the ACLU and the League of Women's Voters and Common Cause, I think, got together and sued to have it happen. So you got a left-wing group suing a left-wing Secretary of State office. They reached this left-wing settlement. And when it did, and the Republican Party jumped in locally and nationally, and it did go up to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court allowed the ruling to stand because they said no state actor
Right.
stepped in to protest. Now, the Senate, who didn't pass the bill, refused to step in and be I don't know if the plaintiff's the right word, but since no one in government objected to this, what about the people? I mean, aren't the people supposed to be the government? All right. Oh God. All right. Banning no state could have a voter ID law.
Correct.
They've worked, haven't they worked?
Yes, they have worked. Numerous states have put them in. Georgia and Indiana, good examples. Alabama, Texas, Mississippi. Those ID laws have been in place for more than a decade in many states. And all these claims you constantly hear that it suppresses votes, keeps people out of the polls, particularly minorities, has been proven to be untrue because we have got 10 years worth of turnout data showing what happened in elections in those states after the voter ID law went in place. Not only did it not suppress votes, in almost all the states, turnout went up, including of minority voters in those elections.
But yet the myth persists.
Right. Well, there's two things to keep in mind with that. One, every state that's put in an ID requirement has put in a provision saying the state government will provide a free ID to anyone who doesn't already have one. And second, that whole suppression claim, I got to tell you, it is one of the most racist, patronizingly racist claims I've ever heard. Because the essence of that claim is that supposedly Black voters are just not smart enough to deal with an ID requirement, which, like I said, is patently racist. But that's what's behind that.
Well, Joe Biden would probably agree with that. He said Blacks and Hispanics aren't smart enough to use the internet.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so ID requirements are a necessary reform. By the way, Georgia is, I think, in the midst of reforming its ID law because they made one mistake with it, which is it only applied to in-person voting.
Oh.
And they're now amending it to apply also to absentee balloting the way Alabama and Kansas.
Yeah, somebody on our YouTube just commented, Roland on it, just commented on that very point just now. All right, two more very quick ones of these provisions, and then we'll let you go, Hans. Thank you again.
Sure.
The bill would automatically allow felons to vote in any state, right?
Yeah, it would. Remember, and this is again something that's clearly unconstitutional. The 14th Amendment specifically gives states the right to decide if and when they're going to restore the right to vote of a felon. This bill says states have to restore the right of a felon to vote the moment he steps out of prison, even if he hasn't, he's still got probation or parole to finish. If he hasn't paid restitution ordered by a court to a victim, the state has no choice in this whatsoever.
All right, obviously the federal requirement, the mandate is wrong, but how do you feel about the issue? You know, if you've served your time and paid your debt to society, should you get your right to vote back? What do you personally think?
Well, I do think states ought to make this decision on their own. I think they ought to keep several things in mind. Some states have had a waiting period before they allow a felon to get his right to vote back. That's actually a pretty good idea when you consider the fact that according to U.S. Justice Department statistics, felons have a recidivism rate approaching 75% on average in the states. So within 3 years, within 5 years, they're back in prison. And having a waiting period is a good way of seeing, has that person really learned their lesson, and have they turned their life around? The other big thing I would say people ought to note about that is basically this. Remember, you don't just lose your right to vote when you're convicted of a felony. You lose your right to own a handgun under the Second Amendment. You lose a lot of other rights. And yet all the people pushing this, do you hear them saying, oh, in addition to restoring the right to vote, we should also restore the right of felons to own a gun?
Yeah.
Or to be a public school teacher? No, they never say any of that because they're only interested in the vote. They aren't interested in restoring all those other rights.
What a great point. And then finally, the last one we'll just mention, like you said, there's so many bad provisions here that they're also looking to remove from the states the right to draw congressional districts.
That's
and
right.
They want to give that to, which is basically done by elected officials in states right now, and any committees they set up. But right now they want to give it to a bunch of unelected bureaucrats at the federal level. Is that what they're trying to do?
Well, what they're saying is that every state has to set up a commission that will have the power the legislature used to have to draw districts. And the big problem with that is, yeah, I know folks sometimes get upset when state legislators draw up districts they don't like, but those legislators are accountable to voters. You don't like what a legislator has done, you could try to vote them out of office.
Right.
These commissions that are being set up will have appointed members, which means they will be unaccountable to voters. And the history of these supposedly independent commissions, if you look at the ones set up in places like Arizona and California, they've been pretty partisan in the way they've drawn up district lines. They don't. The idea here is that somehow they'll be nonpartisan. That hasn't happened in reality.
All right. So this passed the House. I mean, they're going to need this. This is subject to the filibuster in the Senate. So
yes,
the good news is it doesn't appear as if it's going to get through the Senate. Does it?
No. Senator McConnell has said he's going to fight this bill. If they filibuster it, they can stop it. But of course, remember, Chuck Schumer has talked about getting rid of the filibuster rule.
Right. And can you imagine a Manchin or somebody might be honorable enough to vote against this?
Well, that would be nice. But you know what Ted Cruz said about Joe Manchin? He talks a good game, but when you need his vote, he's never there.
All right. Hans von Spakovsky, thanks again. You are our election expert. We hope to have you back soon. Good luck in everything you're doing down there at Heritage.
Thank you very much. I'll see you.
Thank you, Hans. Folks, this is complete never land insanity right here. I mean, regardless of the fact that it's likely not going anywhere, how can any elected official with any sense of reality, with any sense of fairness or decent play, or in my world, sportsmanship, how can anybody vote to destruct our election process this way? It's just insane. I mean, that alone is reason you should not be in office again next year. And I hope every person, I don't think any Republicans voted for it, but I hope every person that voted for this gets held accountable and thrown out of office. Because this folks, this isn't even within the realm of a reasonableness. This is such never land of make-believe stuff to think that you could have a fair election with all these provisions. It's really beyond comment. So let's not comment anymore, and let's go to somebody who is based in the world of reality, and that's our favorite epidemiologist, Dr. Andrew Bostom. Welcome back to In the Dugout. Unmute yourself, Andy. There you go. Oh, what was that? Oh, your audio was. Did you? Wait a minute.
Andy, we got a little trouble with your audio. Let's try disconnecting and clicking back in.
Have a helium balloon or something? Lost them. Suck down. Unconnect your audio and reconnect it. Or what? What do we want to do here, Larry? Try again, Andy. Nope.
No audio, Andy. Let's hang up on the Zoom call and just call back and then just call back in.
All right. So apologize for the tech. That's the beauty of live, any live show and technology. It doesn't always go the way you wish.
Stan, do you think that was more of the cancel culture after us?
Yeah. Well, that was the first thing we're going to talk to Andy about, Larry. Larry, the Liberty guy, is we'll talk about it. We'll give Andy, but just going back to cover what happened with the election bill. Again, as we said, this HR1, which passed the House, and hopefully they'll keep the filibuster and it won't get through the Senate, would implement nationwide the worst of the election rules and fraud opportunities that we saw last fall. Would put those into law and make them all legal. That's unbelievable. All right, Andy, let's give it a try again.
How's that?
Oh, that's good.
Okay.
You sounded like you just drank a helium balloon.
Yeah, no, there's when the connection's wrong, you sound like Mickey Mouse. Yeah.
Well, no, wasn't even that good. Okay, now we were talking a little bit a while ago about cancel culture,
Mm-hmm.
and here's something that you got last week. So
Oh.
explain that to us.
Yeah. Yes, I YouTube doesn't allow the content that disputes the efficacy of local health authorities or World Health Organization guidance. I mean, it speaks for itself. It's a real problem. So what if they're wrong is my question. But what if they're wrong? But what if
can't question them.
You don't who are you to judge whether I am or I am not?
Now as bad as that is, look at it looks like they give you 3 strikes before you're out. You get a whistle blown on you, then it looks like you get a yellow card, then you get an orange card, it looks like, and then you get a red card and you're probably canceled for good, right?
I don't know. I have no idea. So what I did though, Mike, is that, that's YouTube. So that's their platform. It's their platform. I mean, if they didn't like the color scheme that was behind me, it's theirs in a certain. But there are now emerging other platforms. So I took the raw video and I put it up on another platform and embedded it into my blog and discussed it. And, it's not worth disputing with them over this as far as I'm concerned. It's just, okay, they're wrong. It's idiotic, but there are other platforms, thank goodness, where I can place the video, and I did that.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about COVID before we get into the Rhode Island data. And there's a few things you sent me. First, let's just talk about pediatric reaction to COVID as compared with other flus.
Yeah. So, okay. So for YouTube and the World Health Organization and CDC, these are CDC data. That's all they are.
You're not disputing any data. You're just
no. I'm just reproducing them.
Okay. Let's be clear, YouTube. He's not disputing anything here.
That's right. I'm not disputing them. I'm simply reproducing them.
Okay.
But maybe I'm comparing them in a way that they don't like, which may be a different type of violation of community standards.
All right.
And by the way, the serious part of this, Mike, is that we can hopefully tie this within time constraints into what was discussed today at the presser, the new governor's presser, and what the health authority said. And I believe there was someone from representing the teachers. And it's germane to that, because the bottom line is, from their perspective, what they're doing to kids in school is being done regardless of this information. So, for example,
yesterday Steve Moore called it child abuse. All right, what is this chart?
I agree with him. I absolutely agree with him. Particularly when it comes to the issue of masking, and hopefully we'll have a chance to get a little bit into that again. But the bottom line is that these are CDC data. They have flu files that anyone can access and look at simple total mortality. And this is the pediatric age range. There's a different file for COVID. That's a new file, but it's easily accessible. It's publicly accessed information. And these are the data as they exist right now. So you can see the most interesting comparison is to compare pandemic H1N1, which thank God Mike, was a bust. I mean, it could have been a lot worse in terms of adults.
Right.
In terms of
Very
adults.
contagious, but wasn't too deadly, fortunately. Right.
Well, because it turns out that herd immunity matters, Mike.
Yeah.
And a lot of these age cohorts had experienced close enough variants that they had a lot of residual immunity, thank goodness. And there was some vaccination too, which we can do with flu. But look at the kids who did not have a lot of immunity to this, had missed some of the cycles.
Number of deaths or per some million or something like that?
No, these are the raw numbers.
Raw numbers. So COVID deaths among 17 and under, less than virtually every other flu we've had in recent.
With one exception, yeah.
With one exception.
Yeah, and when you compare it head to head with another quote unquote pandemic, it's sixfold.
Yep.
It's sixfold less.
Yep. Wow.
You know, and then the point is, there's only one pandemic year. All those are seasonal flu years, and as you pointed out, virtually all of them are higher. In some cases, 3-4 times higher. And none of this required kids to be masked, to be tested over and over and over again in the school system, and it's more deadly. I mean, so Mike, we have to confront some of the very, very simple, basic, logical flaws to our public health and governmental overlords that they're subjecting us all to, in this case, kids. This is not logical.
All right, let's take a look over at a larger picture of deaths. And this is a video you sent me. Now I'm going to give a little heads up. I'm going to have you talk over it. I may skip ahead. The video is in Swedish, the narrator. So we're going to mute the video, but it's subcaptioned in English.
Right.
So I'm not going to play the whole 3.5 minutes, but I am going to skip ahead to various points in it and just have you comment as we move forward to tell us what we're seeing. So give us the backdrop as I start playing the video.
Just a heads up is that I have a colleague who's a Swedish journalist, an outstanding journalist. So she did the translation, which another colleague used to create the subtitles that you're going to display. And so this is the lead demographer from Sweden, Dr. Hemström. He is the official voice on what is mortality in the country. And he's being asked the excess mortality compared to very recent years, 2015 to 2019. And
he says that number is 7,000.
Yeah, and right. And what you can see is that it's really dependent upon the 2 COVID spikes. So in terms of the contribution to total mortality, which is indisputable, Mike. You can't argue over whether it was a COVID death or not. But he's showing the spike now. But you can't argue that a death is a death, and that becomes very important. So what he's also showing is that much of the year the rate was the same or lower, and that's actually interesting too.
So the green line is the anticipated rate of death
based on a very limited number of years, a few years.
And the red line is the actual COVID deaths.
Exactly. And no, nothing is actual COVID deaths. It's all total mortality.
All right. Total mortality. All right. So we saw a spike. So we can blame COVID for a big spike in March there.
Big spike.
Yep. And then we're going to see another spike in November here.
Right. But not as big. But not as big in their system. So
in total, they're seeing. Now I'm going to stop right here because I did something. Total, they're showing. Let me just go back that they had a total increase. Those 2 spikes created a total increase
of an excess of 7,000 deaths.
7,000 more people died last year than you would expect. But in Sweden, I looked, they're reporting 13,000 deaths from COVID. Is the official number that the other world tracking organization.
No. That's garbage. These are the official data from Sweden. This is what we go by.
No, I know. I'm just saying that there's only been 7,000 more deaths in actuality.
Right.
The reports are that there were 13,000 deaths.
Okay, so we're talking about excess deaths as judged by Sweden versus deaths by Worldometer. But these are the gold standard data. So what he's saying is compared to the baseline established 4 years prior, there was an excess. But remember, it's a very narrow period, and that becomes extremely important, Mike.
Now we're going to look at the at it.
Now we get a picture. He was specifically asked by the interviewer to place this in a historical context going back to 1900. There's the huge 1918 flu spike. Look at what happens after he goes through that. It's really neat the way you see it. It's through a transparent thing, a grid.
That's a really cool tool he's got there. Yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
I want one of those. Anyway, that's
right. The next thing that becomes of interest is the Asian flu pandemic of 1957, 58, which we had in this country too, by the way.
Okay.
And another one, which we'll see about 10 years later, he'll fill it in. That's the Hong Kong flu of 1968, 69, the Woodstock year. And then, but look at where it is. I mean, so look at how it doesn't, it's basically staying the same. Okay.
These are total deaths in the country.
These are look, freeze that. Can you freeze that?
Yep, I can. Oh, let me go back just a bit. Yep, right there.
Yeah, this is so key. So nothing comes even close to what happened in 1918.
Over here.
And then you get a long period. There's an overall improvement in mortality. There's little spikes, particularly in relation to 57 and 68 that are flu pandemic years. But look at this point here, and this is very critical. What he points out is that even in the absence of pandemic flu, or in this case, pandemic corona, you see a period of time where total mortality is higher than it was even at the corona peak. This is so critical, and this is recent times. This is over the last quarter century.
But what it shows to me is that the corona spike is hardly any bigger than these other flu spikes, and it's actually smaller than this flu spike, and of course nowhere near.
And it's no, but the total mortality of corona versus the years 57, 58 is no higher. It's actually lower than 68. And we have a long period in the absence of pandemic flu where total mortality is actually higher. And as he points out, basically his summary is that in terms of total mortality, 2012 is simply bringing the Swedes back. So 2020 is bringing the Swedes back to 2012.
What does this say? This says that far too many deaths are being adjudicated and attributed to COVID than probably is the reality. Is that the bottom line here?
As a matter of fact, Sweden was driven by care home nursing. They call them care homes, nursing home deaths, particularly in Stockholm County. An analysis of care home deaths in Stockholm County revealed that 75% of them were deaths where there might have been a positivity, but they literally could not ascertain a change in the person's clinical status. In other words, they had profound comorbidity. They were average age 86. They were drifting off, unfortunately, to their demise. They couldn't find a clinical change in their status. 17%, they might have had a lot of morbidity, but they were stable, got sick, COVID was tested positive, and died. 8%, they got over COVID, recovered, and died of something else. But Sweden has to label them all as COVID deaths.
All right, so this kind of analysis needs to be done in other countries, because you and I were talking earlier, and this longer term view, when more data comes in, when we can take a broader look at all this, is going to really tell the story as to whether or not these COVID deaths have been overinflated, over adjudicated, as you say, or not, right? So
right.
Sweden gives us a big clue on this.
Total mortality is a very useful tool because you can dispute whether someone actually died of COVID, but you can't dispute whether they died.
They died, right? Okay.
There have been some preliminary analyses that I've seen, and I don't think they're ready for prime time, but I can share with you what I've seen, which is making sense to me, which is that we're a different population than Sweden, so it's not a mere 8-year event in our country. As from based on the data I've seen, but you can literally go back not so long ago to 2003, 2004 and see very comparable total mortality to what you saw this year, adjusted to standardize the populations because the population keeps growing, its demography keeps changing, but standardized to the year 2000, roughly 2003, 2004 has the same total mortality on these preliminary estimates that we're seeing for 2020. That's really important.
So just to put some numbers on it, we're reporting over 500,000 deaths attributed to COVID. But
Right.
it's going to be interesting to see is how much actual excess mortality did we have over that period. Right?
That's right. And like I said, I think these preliminary analyses are good. They're not quite ready, I think, for prime time, but they're very consistent with what Sweden showed.
Let's quickly change gear, go to the Rhode Island numbers like we do every week. So while the cases continue to go down, although they've maybe plateaued in the last 4 or 5 days, that's shown here in the positivity rate.
I do want to say something about this, Mike, because and I really think I think we should consider this again. Is that thanks to your efforts, thanks to a private citizen, I was in on this too independently. But our combined efforts, we got the data to release the cycle thresholds for the early period of the pandemic, the first wave, the state data, and what we showed, just quickly in summary, is that as the first wave ebbed, the average cycle threshold values of these PCR tests went into a range which is basically the non-infectious range. Yep. It corresponded with the decline in mortality, which is very important. Right. And now we're again in one of those periods where actually, Mike, we had 2 days in the last week or so, 0 deaths. This is wonderful. This is wonderful. I wrote it down. I think it was February 26th and March 2nd, 0 deaths were reported. Now they may add one, down a week or so from now, but as it stands now, February 26th, and that's going back a little bit, February 26th, 0 deaths have been reported on that day and on March 2nd. So I think it's time to try and get the state to release more data, because my concern is that by the time you're down to 3% positive, or certainly 2% positive, we are in the range of the limit of the testing. False positives. And, we're experiencing now, there are 4 human coronaviruses. We're experiencing now the time of year where they're still elevated. And a very interesting study out of Europe when all the assays were compared. They do these assay round robins and they send in blank specimens, like just salt water. In this case, they did something very clever in Europe. They spiked some of these samples with the human coronaviruses that cause common colds, 2 of them. They came back 3% positive, Mike. And that's a bad sign. So that can contribute, the relying on excessively high cycle thresholds can contribute, because I don't want us, told that, we can't open this up. We can't do that. We have to have kids on mask. We have to have the public on mask because we're still at 2%. We're not going to get to 0. This may be as low as we get. Yep.
All right. All right. Let's move on to vaccines. We got a lot to cover still in a short amount of time. So there's a third vaccine out.
Yes.
Before we talk about the J&J vaccine, I want to talk about something we heard at the press conference today, where apparently Governor McKee, in one of his first acts, has now approved that teachers get priority in the vaccine line. From a medical perspective, what's the data justification of that?
There's no justification for it unless they meet the other criteria. Look, Mike, I don't know what the data are specifically for Rhode Island, but I know the national data. I looked this up. 83% nationally of teachers are less than 55 years old. So as far as I'm concerned, if those demographics apply to Rhode Island, I don't see why they shouldn't, or maybe 83% of those people should not be anywhere at the front of the line. They should wait their turn. It's just not right. There are people, because of age, because of comorbidity, that should be ahead of them.
So there is a second.
Also, the environment. One of the other officials admitted that the school is a very safe environment. We're not seeing communication of COVID there.
Now, I don't agree with what happened, but we also have to consider one other dimension and argument to this, that if as spoiled as we may think the teachers unions and certain teachers will be, if that's what it's going to take to get them back in the classroom so they can teach our kids, that is, at least there's a societal benefit to placing them ahead of line.
There's no
medical justification for it. Wouldn't you
I think
agree with that?
we have to balance a couple of things. First of all, in favor of your argument, Mike, and it's also an economic argument because they
Sure.
by
Yes,
by
it
keeping kids out of school, it ties up all kinds of families.
Yes, it does.
But the point is, we're actually doing very well now in vaccinating the truly highest risk, the 75 plus and the 65 plus. According to Governor McKee, because he has the latest update, I think we're close to 2/3 to 70% of the 75 plus, and maybe 60%, close to 60% of the 65 plus. Look, my argument is simple. The teachers could go back to the young teachers. All right, if you think 55 is too high, all the teachers less than 50 years old, vaccination, no vaccination, get your arses back into school. That's it, plain and simple. People with comorbidities, put them at the front of the line, throw them in with people more, getting vaccinated sooner. That's fine. But, not to penalize those that are truly at high risk, though. That's wrong. That's wrong. It should be really risk stratified. As far as transmission in schools, though, Mike, and masking kids and testing kids endlessly, this is Steve Moore's right. This is child abuse. Quick study published in Pediatrics already. 90,000 in-person students and staff in North Carolina were followed up in the fall semester. It was found that community transmission outside the school was 96% of the cases. Only 4% by contact tracing could they show had any bearing to the school environment. And more importantly, teachers unions, listen to me. 0 out of 90,000 followed, 0 cases where a kid transmitted to a teacher. 0.
Yeah.
I mean, so this is again within limits, fine. But people who are truly at risk, if they're not teachers, should not be penalized because of teachers.
All right. So, and I'll make a comment. I don't want to get you to comment politically, but I'll make the comment that there is no medical justification for it. There may be a societal benefit to it, but I think the real reason behind it was politics. Dan McKee, when he started those mayoral academies in Cumberland, became enemy number one of the teachers union. Mm-hmm. And Dan McKee, I think, doesn't want to go into an election in a year and a half with the teachers union as his enemy. So I think he made a political move today. I'm going to throw this bone to the teachers union, even though it doesn't make any sense, even though most kids are back at school now anyway. Right. Or most schools at least open for it, but I'm going to throw them this political bone. So anyway, that's my comment. I don't want you to get on that. All right, let's talk about the new J&J vaccine.
Right.
In very simple, quick layman's terms, how does it differ? Because it is different than the Pfizer and the Moderna, correct?
Right.
Go ahead. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and I want to talk about efficacy too, but you've asked me to explain as simply as I can.
Let's just talk about the mechanics of it first.
Right. So what the virus? Well, it is, but I jumped the gun. What the vaccine is an adenovirus called adenovirus 26, which can, these are viruses that typically can cause mild gastrointestinal illness, diarrhea. Some can cause mild pneumonias, etc. But this virus adenovirus 26 is manipulated in such a way that it can't reproduce.
So first of all, it's not the coronavirus, it's a different virus.
It's an adenovirus. Yes, it's an adenovirus. So what they do is they take, and it's now being transformed into what they call an adenovirus vector, something that delivers something. So they make it incapable of reproduction. So in other words, because it's going to have to infect people.
It can't spread throughout your body.
Right. It's going to have to, it could spread throughout the body. It just can't become a rip-roaring infection and reproduce itself. So and then into that viral vector, they put the gene for a surface protein on the coronavirus. When everyone sees these little schematic drawings of the coronavirus, it always has these spikes coming out of it. Yep. It looks like one of those medieval weapons. Keep
it simple.
Yeah, and it's called the spike protein. So the gene that produces the spike protein is incorporated in this essentially, reproduction incapable virus, the adenovirus 26. It goes into the cell and it goes into your nucleus, and it's going into your DNA to produce the messenger RNA that then synthesizes the spike protein.
which
So it's different.
the real virus.
It's different than the
All right, so
so-called
let me try it
mRNA
in
viruses
layman's
the
terms.
mRNA vaccines that are out there.
Let me try it in layman's terms to repeat what you said. So,
Go.
unlike the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, which does not actually invade the genome of the cell or your DNA, this one does.
Yes.
So, does that make it the long-term effects of it a little more scary to you?
I guess there are some theoretical concerns, and we can't dismiss them. But the point is that just in turn, without even worrying about that necessarily right now, it's different. It is inserting a gene into your DNA to code the messenger RNA that then goes outside the nucleus of the cell to the protein manufacturing portion of the cell outside the nucleus called the ribosome, producing a lot of this spike protein, and that's its job. Now, what's different about the other approach, which is the mRNA vaccine, not an adenovirus vaccine, those are the Pfizer and Moderna, is that there they take the mRNA, which does its job actually outside the nucleus. They take the mRNA, they synthesize it in a way that it won't get destroyed before it, from the time it's injected till the time it's got to do its thing. But it never enters the nucleus and it never interacts with the genome. It goes straight to the protein producing machinery in the cell. The ribosome produces the same, protein, the spike protein, and then is quickly degraded. So, mechanistically, you can see the difference. One is interacting with the genome, the other is not.
Wow. So, we're screwing around, and to use my term with DNA, maybe we're doing it right, but we're still screwing around with DNA, right?
It's clearly interacting with the
you wouldn't
genome.
use that term medically, but
yeah, no, it's what I think you have to keep it simple, and we don't, and frankly, we don't know the long-term effects with
that's
either.
what I'm saying.
We,
Do we know the
we actually have more data right now with Moderna and Pfizer, and there are rare complications as there are with all vaccines, but they both look pretty safe. And then the mechanism to me, this is my opinion. The mechanism is more appealing to me because it's never getting into the nucleus.
Moderna. All right, let's move on. Now, the Johnson & Johnson one is designed to be just one dose only, where Moderna and Pfizer were supposed to be two, but we're finding out that only one dose of Moderna and Pfizer are pretty much doing the trick, right?
Well, that's the other thing. If we just look at the clinical trial data, forget about the real world application, although clinical trials are in the real world, but they're very controlled. If we look at the clinical trial data and compare them, the efficacy rates, the efficacy rate for the Johnson & Johnson single shot is in the neighborhood of 65 to 70%. The efficacy rate from the original trials of the Moderna and the Pfizer mRNA vaccines is on the order of 90 to 95%. But those data have been reanalyzed and done independent of the manufacturers, which is very good. They've been reanalyzed and shown that the first shot confers essentially the same amount of protection as waiting for the second shot. And
is there a risk to a second shot?
Is there risk? Well, there's the risk. There's double the risk of the local complications. It's 2 shots, et cetera. I don't think there's overall that there were concerns that priming the person and then giving them a second dose you'd see more severe side effects. I don't know how much that has actually played out. The big concern was that it wouldn't generate a robust enough of an immune response, and that's why you needed a booster. That is now being challenged independent of Merck and Moderna. And it's also been looked at in a reanalysis of some Israeli data in the field, which is also suggesting that the first shot did better than they might have thought. So if you were to compare them, in other words, just
how should one decide though whether to get a second shot? Talk to your doctor or what? How should one decide?
Right at this point, the doctor's going to tell you to get unless Pfizer and Moderna come out, and I think I've seen some news reports that obviously they're glomming on to some of this. that they may want to push the idea that, well, we're out, one shot of ours is as good or maybe better than the one that's being touted by J&J as the one shot.
All right, two more quick topics. All right, very quick. We're running past our time, but that's all right. This is important. So first of all, we got to get our little dig in here. So, Dr. Fauci, if he adds a mask every year, he'll be wearing 14 masks by 2035, and he will have moved the goalposts another 14.
That's a great cartoon. I love Branko.
Yeah, another 14. He'll move the goalposts another 14 yards to the left. Is it time? Texas and Mississippi are opening things up. No more mask mandates, lockdowns. Is it time for Rhode Island to end a mask mandate?
Absolutely. I wrote. By the way, Mike, if it's not,
it's never going to happen in the near term,
if it's not too proprietary, I have a website. It's a collection of my writings.
Yeah, go ahead.
But they're focused. It's www.andrewbostom.org. I wrote an essay basically saying that Rhode Island needs to stop the mask mandate now. It hasn't done anything to affect the epidemic curve whatsoever, nothing. And in fact, Mike, the more important thing is that just like we require clinical trials to prove vaccine efficacy, well, the verdict has been in for at least the past 12 years in randomized controlled trials, just like there's randomized controlled trials for the 3 vaccines we've been talking about, that masks don't work. They don't work to prevent influenza and other related respiratory viruses, and they don't work for coronavirus. So the idea that you would still impose them on
politically, do you think that could ever happen here? That any governor or general assembly?
What's a travesty is that I heard, and I wrote it down because I think it was Jim Hummel who asked Dr. Scott about, quote, when can we ditch the mask, or kids in schools, quote, ditch the mask. And she said they're very necessary and effective. And she doubled down on how effective they were. Mike, I was trained, it's a long time ago now. I was trained 30 years ago when so-called evidence-based medicine was taking over. And it's supposed to be the prevailing paradigm right now. Evidence-based medicine is based on randomized controlled trials. It's not based on what Dr. Scott says.
Yeah, your security blankets, right?
And the evidence, if you had any other intervention where after 12 years in the modern era, all the studies were negative, the randomized controlled trials were negative, you'd say, hey, this doesn't work, leave it alone.
All right, last one. There was an article out basically saying that Rhode Island is one of 7 states very close to herd immunity.
Right, however we define
it. The number of known cases, they extrapolate how many other cases, they add in the vaccines, how many unknown cases, and they're putting us at 62%, which is very close to the 75% that most people say that the disease can't spread. So two-part question, and then we'll finish. A, do you agree? And B, what was B? Well, first of all, I'll think of it be your answer. So what do you think of this little analysis?
Yeah, I think it's a hypothetical. I think it's a perfectly reasonable hypothetical, particularly when you look at how the second wave hit Rhode Island, and there was so much infection. And therefore, there's a lot of natural immunity in the community from people who were infected and recovered.
T cells.
And now we're doing a good job.
B cells, right? Yeah.
Pardon?
Plus T cells and B cells, right, and all that.
Yeah, that in other words, that's the full spectrum. And actually, when the other thing that Dr. Scott mentioned was about doing more seroprevalence studies, which picks up. It's a crude way to pick up the antibody, the B cell mediated immunity. It's hardly complete. It doesn't even touch the T cell immunity, which could be many-fold. So I think that's a perfectly reasonable estimate based on how many people have been infected. And now let's give credit. We're doing a much better job now in vaccinating people.
All right, here's the big question though. If we're anywhere near this 62% of herd immunity, is there any chance so what that means is there's only 38% at most of the population who could be newly infected. So is there any way we can see a major new epidemic, this massive increase in cases like we saw last year, if there are so few people left to become infected? Is there any
It
way?
doesn't, Mike, look, you never say never. It doesn't look likely. It looks like we're well on the way to I think we've broken the back of the epidemic now. But certainly given increased vaccination, which is the artificial herd immunity, I mean, it should be stamped down altogether. And it's all the more reason to restore normality. And why I don't think, look, the bottom line is, Mike, whether we achieve herd immunity or not, masks don't help.
Okay.
So that's the idea that these politicians and sadly public health officials are still chastising people about wearing masks is just a travesty. So I think I agree. I think we're close. Now, Mike, theoretically, could a strain finally evolve with all these? And that's the other thing. They keep talking about variants.
Fair.
Mike, what we know about variants right now is concrete evidence. All 4 of the major variants are susceptible to both, at least in the laboratory, are susceptible to both naturally acquired T-cell immunity and mRNA, Moderna, Pfizer vaccine. That paper was just published by one of the leading virologic institutes in the United States.
Dr. Scott said today that the J&J vaccine was especially effective on the variant. So I guess all 3 would be then.
I don't know, but the bottom line is, the other thing is that when you look at a specific variant, the UK variant, take over a non-UK population. It did so in Denmark the first 6 weeks of this year. What they saw in Denmark was that it went from 3% of the cases to 47% of the cases. Over that same 6-week period, absolute infections dropped by 85%.
Yep.
I mean, so it took over, but it didn't have any impact on the epidemic curve.
All right, Doctor, again, thank you. Awesome stuff. We'll look forward to see what the news brings us next week. We know you'll be on top of it. Andy, thanks again for being in the
Take care, Mike.
Okay, folks. So again, with our 2 guests, we see how the establishment left, those in power, literally live in a land of make-believe. This election reform bill, the U.S. House of Representatives is trying to force down states' throats, is so ridiculous, makes it so easy to cheat. It just can't be reality. It just can't be. And now we see, even as our numbers improve, we still see mandates for masks. We still see restrictions on restaurants. Even though they eased a few restrictions today on businesses and restaurants, the data doesn't support keeping it. It just doesn't right now. And especially as we're approaching this level where there's very few of us left to get infected. I'm one of them, but apparently 62% of Rhode Islanders in one way or another already have an immunity to this, natural by having the disease or by getting a vaccine. So, but yet they just keep peddling these narratives. And this is the world we live in, folks. It's very tough. We're going to keep exposing it. We're going to keep talking about it. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet. And please tell your friends about it. Right now we're here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. Get our audience up a little higher. We're going to start adding Mondays and Fridays. Let me know if you'd like to have us be 5 days a week. I don't know if Larry, the Liberty guy, will like us doing that or not. It's a lot of extra work for him. But we want to start coming at you more. There's so much to say. There's so much of this left-wing agenda to talk about and to raise awareness about and to push back on. And there's so few people out there willing to do that. We're one of them. We're one of the only news organization. You're not going to hear Hans von Spakovsky come on any other local. This guy's a national election expert from the Heritage Foundation, the most respected conservative think tank in the world. And we had him on our show because of our organization's relationship with Heritage. And then Dr. Boston, I mean, he's been one of the leaders in the country on cycle threshold, masks, death, the potential inflation of death rates. I mean, this is stuff you don't hear elsewhere in the media. So I hope you're appreciative of this show. I hope you'll subscribe, tell your friends about it. Help us. Go out and recruit some friends. Have them come over your house, get together. You can stay 6 feet apart or not. That's up to you. Don't wear a mask, though. But we'll see you next week on In the Dugout. And until then, Mike Stenhouse, we'll see you next game.